We're going to call the meeting to order, it being, I believe, about 5 or 6 after 7. So anybody who wants to participate, invited inside. First off, we did begin with caucuses, and I know that districts 2 and 3 have elected, maybe people started to come in now as well. Districts 2 and 3 did elect new members to fill the seats that weren't filled at the election. So I would like to ask the people who chaired those meetings in District 2 and District 3 to give us the names of the people who have been elected as town meeting representatives. So we could have people from District 2 and 3 who did the voting. Mr. Webster? All right. Mr. Wheelock, I guess you stand first.
Okay, I was coming because 2 comes before 3, so.
I know your sister just called that ages.
We had 13 openings, and we had a grand total of 18 people who showed up and exhibited interest and signed that they would like to be appointed, which did my heart a great deal. What's even more important, we ended up having 5 of them say, "Take my name off," so we didn't have to count votes. We just elected them. They are Julie Grover, Emily Regine? Okay, good. Raphael Solomon, Virginia Goodman, Richard Langlois, Mary Elder, Evan Bolivar, Gary Carrier, Mary McCarthy, Joseph Pino, Alec Miller, Mary McLaughlin, and Jackie Stromberg. Once again, I thank you.
Thank you.
District 3 had not many dilemmas, because you see in District 3, people sign up before the last minute. Their commitment to this institution is great, and we never had much of a problem. So my job is very easy. I'm glad to tell you we nominated 1 new person for a 1-year term, David Kennedy.
Thank you. Annette, are there any procedures that these people need to follow in order to come to a vote at town meeting?
No, they're all set. They've just been.
All right, so we'll look forward to having everybody who's been elected and everybody who was elected tonight at town meeting a week from this coming Saturday. The process we're going to follow tonight is essentially to walk through the most significant of the articles that are going to be voted on at town meeting a week from Saturday. And the biggest piece of the work that we do over any given year as a select board, and this year being no exception, is putting together the budget. So I'm going to begin by providing an overview of this year's FY15 budget. There are probably 5 to 8 other articles about which there may be questions, and about which I know that I would make some comments, and other people on the board will probably make some comments. And then after we go through those articles, if there's any other issues that anybody wants to address, that anybody has any questions about, please let us know. We'll do our best to address those as well. This year's proposed FY15 budget begins on page 62 of the 2013 annual report. It is my understanding that the town clerk let everybody know that their packets were available to be picked up at town hall. Any number of people have picked up their packets, but many people have not. A relatively large pile of additional annual reports were brought here, but I understand those have run out. So if you need to look on with somebody else, please share. The budget for this coming year is $16,000,000. The proposed budget is $16,284,625. That represents, including additional payments on the bond for the police fire facilities, approximately a 3.8% increase in spending over last year. And the calculation that leads to that 3.84% number is that last year's budget was $15,688,424, but we also had a transfer of $765,000 from the capital fund. And the $15,688,424 was the total last year. It was $14,923,357 plus $765 gave the $15,688,424 in spending last year, as opposed to this year's spending of $16,284,000. I think it's useful. I've had the opportunity to make this presentation each of the last 2 years because Mr. DeGray was golfing. I think it's useful to overview what does that budget consist of. Essentially, the $16 million covers about $11,592,000 for our 9 departments: police, fire, public works, library, parks and recs, and the administration. There are separate payments that we make that are divided out separately, but about $11,592,000 of the 16 and change million is for those departments. And if you go through those 9 different departments, about 85% of that $11.5 million is personnel costs. It's costs for salaries and benefits. So if I can explain to you a little bit about the process that we used this year to develop the budget, we committed at the beginning of the select board term last March to going through and reviewing the operations of each of the town departments so that we could make sure that we understood as well as we could operationally what's happening in each of the departments. So each of the department heads and other personnel from the various departments came to select board meetings and made presentations about all of the work that's happening in those various departments. A lot of it is mandated by statute, listers, town clerk, finance and the like. We're at essentially the bare minimum in terms of numbers of employees in order to provide the statutorily required services that have to be maintained by the town. And then we get to the larger departments: police, fire, public works, library, and parks and recs. We went through the operations of all the departments, and then at budget season, we considered whether there were cuts that could be made. Cuts that could be made to supplies, cuts that could be made to items that are outside of employees and benefits, and then we looked at staffing issues as well. So we asked all the departments to talk with us about what it would look like should we decide that we were going to cut staffing levels. And the select board considered all of those recommendations and ultimately concluded to a large extent that staffing levels should remain the same. I'm just going to take, for example, the fire department as one example here. What the chief explained to us, and correct me if I'm wrong if I don't remember correctly, but that we operate with 3 battalions of 7 firefighters, and then we have supervisory and administrative personnel. And were we to cut into those firefighting personnel and not bring all those people to the next budget, we would not have the full firefighting services that we need. Similarly, the police chief explained to us the staffing levels in the police department, and we concluded that those levels are necessary to maintain the minimum staffing levels and the minimum services that we expect as a town. And so the budget that's presented to you now is essentially level service. We expect to be providing the same services this coming year as this past year, and the cost of that this coming year is $16,284,625. I've gone through for each of those departments what is the vast majority of the cost, and that's essentially personnel and benefits. The other expenses that bring us from 11,592 and change up to 16 and change million, we have insurance payments, $646,000. We pay for trash collection and recycling, $1,006,645. Our debt payments, and I'll talk about police fire in a little bit, are $1,593,450. We have auxiliary services for the bus, which is about $50,000 next year. Streetlights and rescue, $413,000. The human services funding is $130,000 and change, and we'll speak to that a little bit under a separate article. Our capital budget probably should be larger this coming year. We have a capital budget for next year of $551,000, but in order to repair Western Avenue, it would take about $200,000 unless funding comes for that from another source. But the capital budget for next year is $551,000. We've been down one or two graders during a significant part of the winter maintenance season, which has delayed some of the winter road maintenance that we've had to do. And the time will come when we'll need to think about whether to buy a new grader. Costs $187,000 to run the municipal center, and then there's regional spending included for courts, and the DID spending about $78,000. That brings us to the $16,284,625. That is a general overview of the budget, essentially level service from this past year. And I think it's probably a good time now, unless any of the board members or town manager or the finance director have anything to add, it probably would be a good time now to answer any questions about the budget as presented. Yes, please. Let's start.
Let's start with District 1. Sorry to do this, I got my whole page. Questions?
That's why we're here.
Okay, page...
That's why Patrick's here.
Oh, well, he's first on the list. On page 65. Town manager salary's up 8.8%, and we haven't even hired the new one yet. So I'm wondering why.
I'll speak to that. As most people probably know, the town manager resigned June 8th, and she was here until the middle of the end of July. Patrick Moreland was appointed interim town manager, and he has served very capably in that role since the end of July 2013. We went through a search process through which we reviewed 62 applications. We brought people back for interviews for both the first and a second round. Ultimately, we came down to two potential finalist candidates, and we weren't able to reach agreement with either of them. The salary range that was advertised in the first round was 75 to 90. We just reposted the listing authorized at the last select board meeting, and I think the ads have probably begun to run this week. Jan could tell us the ads have started to run, Jan? I'm asking the town manager, secretary. And the salary range that's listed now is 80 to 95. That salary range is commensurate with what we saw as a result of the work we did screening candidates. It also recognizes what are the salaries for the highest paid employees within the town as a whole. So The salary range at this point is 80 to 95 in the listing, and we are budgeted for 90, but we haven't made the hiring decision yet.
Okay. On pages 65, 68, 69, 70, and 71, this vacation BB, retirement pay.
Excellent.
Shows up, and it totals $76,607, and what is it for?
I'll speak to that as well, if that's okay. In years past, we have not budgeted for expenses that were entirely foreseeable. And I can't speak to exactly why that is, but the collective bargaining agreements that we have with the various unions that represent the employees who work for the town include various benefits. They include cash out of vacation pay. They include certain retirement pay as well when the employee retires. Those are negotiated benefits. They've been in the contracts for a long time. The contracts, I think, are all up for renegotiation next year, and although I do anticipate that we will be re-examining the packages as a whole, I can't make any representation that the benefits, how the benefits will change, if at all. We had not previously budgeted for those expenses, and instead, we just found that money after the year began. It's certainly, and this is really thanks to Patrick and to John, I think even mostly Patrick, as I understand it. We think that it's prudent on an annual basis to budget for that because we can tell what those expenses are going to be, and that's why they're now showing up in the budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Patrick can speak to that as well.
Thank you, David. I'd just like to add one additional thing. In putting together the budget this year, developing the budget package for the board, one of the things that we paid particular attention to that I don't think had been done in the past was to make sure that there were open lines of communication between our office and each of the departments with particular concern to foreseeable retirements. So if we know somebody's going to be retiring and we understand, in some cases those employees have been with the town for great many years, they've got accrued vacation time that they have a balance of. We know there's going to be a payout upon their departure, so we should be budgeting for that rather than not budgeting for that.
The next couple are just, there's not really any change this year, but I'm curious, the computer equipment maintenance line is $30,000, and is that an outside service, a contract, or do we have a tech guy that works for the town?
Yes, ma'am, that's an outside contract. We have a relationship with a vendor, and he provides regular maintenance. He and his company provide regular maintenance of our computer systems. And
Is that all of the systems, like throughout?
yeah, that's throughout all departments. And that includes server maintenance and a full range of sort of computer maintenance activities.
Okay, on that same page 66, the GIS mapping, is that through the Wickham Regional Commission? I mean, that, in there, they're right up on page 37, it says that's what they do for us, but...
The Wickham Regional Commission definitely does provide some mapping services for us, some specialized mapping services. But the GIS systems that are the line item under General Services, I think it's under General Services, goes to pay for a number of in-house GIS functions. If any of you have seen Brattleboro Maps Online and the functionality that's provided there, that comes from that particular line item. That is also the place for which a variety of other special mapping projects that the town needs to undertake in terms of maintaining not just our maps, but maintaining where our we have highly specialized maps for example, where our water system is, where our sewer system is, a lot of detail on buildings and what's in them, and so there's a whole series of sort of GIS based technologies that the town utilizes to provide services to the community, obviously, and then to track and keep track of some of our specialized systems.
So we're paying a company other than when they do or something to do that? Okay. Same page, 66, workers' comp. We're up again, $40,900 this year. We had a huge jump last year. We're over $100,000 difference between this 2015 budget and 2013. Is there, are we having a problem with workers' comp? We've had a lot of cases.
We certainly have had a number of injuries. Much of the work that some of our departments do is dangerous work, particularly at Public Works, obviously also in the fire department, where injuries can occur in batches at specific fire events. So we have had a great number of claims. We are working with the League of Cities and Towns, which is our insurance carrier, or our insurance provider, and we're working on various different safety improvements that can hopefully help to minimize that in the future. But you're right, it is a large expense.
Yeah. Health insurance, the same. Is that also through Vermont League of Cities and Towns? I mean, that's got a $176,000 jump this year. Are we insuring more people, or are the rates just going up that much?
I think the best possible answer is, unfortunately, the rates are just going up that much.
And are we working at containing some of those costs in our negotiations and our bargaining groups, or will we be when we redo contracts?
What I can say is that the last round of negotiations, we worked to standardize our relationships with the various unions in terms of our ability to choose the plan and determining the size of the deductible. So we now have large deductible plans, but I believe as for each of the unions, the agreement at present provides that we are paying the out-of-pocket for the high deductible plans.
We're paying the town pays for the monthly premium for the health insurance for the employees and provides 50% of the out-of-pocket maximum for the year for the employees into a health savings account.
And employees don't pay any percentage of their insurance at this point?
Not of the premium payments, not at this time.
Wow, that needs to be renegotiated.
Contracts, like I said, are
Yeah.
I think are all going to be up for renegotiation over the course of the next 2 years.
Okay, on page 69, under recycling. New line, public education, $15,000?
The legislature, the Vermont legislature, and I tried to approach this topic about 6 months ago, and I was told that I didn't do it as sensitively as I should have. But the Vermont legislature has essentially determined that pay-as-you-throw is going to be adopted regardless of our individual decision here at the town level. And so we need to have a system in place, either by volume or by weight, for individual people who are putting trash out, that would be every one of us, to have to pay by proportional volume or weight, I think by the beginning of calendar 2016.
By July 1, 2015.
By July 1, 2015, so that's a year and a half from now. And one of the requirements is that we engage in public education efforts, the transition.
So the state has...
Sort of an unfunded mandate.
Yes, right.
Although ultimately the million and change that we pay for trash collection will have to be borne by individual homeowners and renters in buying stickers or bags or whatever system ultimately is finally adopted for the pay-as-you-throw system that's going to be mandated by the state, not by the town.
So actually, then we could expect a decrease in the 2016 budget of that.
It will be a decrease at the town level, but individual homeowners and renters who are throwing stuff away are going to have to pay the money out of pocket rather than through taxes. And I think it's my understanding ultimately that residents are going to wind up paying more collectively for this service than we now pay through the taxes, but I'm not sure there's much we can do about that. Just based upon the way in which it's distributed at this point.
Yep.
Penny, if you throw this out, there could be other forms of that are still going to have to be negotiated.
Just speak to the mic.
Pay as you throw is, that's one way. I mean, there could be other ways that we can look at it. And that's going to have to be brought up at one of the meetings, on how we adopt this. Pay as you throw was adopted in 2008, 2009, I believe. But so there are other forms of recycling at this point and getting rid of garbage. But, that's going to have to be brought up at probably a town meeting.
So the state has not mandated pay as you throw, it's just mandated...
A system of that.
Oh,
Right, mandatory recycling.
okay. This one I'm just curious about. Who's the pound keeper? I don't think I've ever seen a line for the pound keeper before, and I've looked through this budget, but I
don't know who's the pound keeper. Is anybody here the pound keeper?
I don't know, but they're getting $10,000, so...
That's Humane Society.
Okay, so we pay.
That's Humane Society. Thank you.
Okay, page 70.
This is not the self-handle.
No, it's just, sorry, I have to do this, it's my nature. Sorry. Public Works Department Head, 49%, I'm assuming his percent time changed or moved or something, because I'm sure he's hoping he got a 49% raise, but, I kind of doubt that.
Thanks, Billy.
I really think he's worth it.
This just involves reallocation between this budget and the utilities budget.
Okay, that, I kind of figured, now the utilities budget is an enterprise fund, right? That we
Utility
don't-
budget is an enterprise
we
fund.
have
and
no
we adopt-
access to.
That's correct. We voted on it last week.
Yeah. Traffic safety. I don't, that's a new item on page 71, $5,000. Is that?
It is. The Traffic Safety Committee is one of the committees of the Select Board. It meets once a month on Tuesday mornings. It's made up of representatives from the Select Board, the various departments, and the school district. And the Traffic Safety Committee recommended to the Select Board that there be a budget for purchasing traffic safety equipment, including, for example, portable radar signs, which are one of the more effective tools for traffic calming and keeping people's speeds down on the roads. And although we were facing significant budget pressures, the Select Board concluded that that was an item that should stay in the budget, particularly given the fatalities that we've had over the course of the last years. So we are hopeful to purchase a portable radar detector that can be moved from location to location within the town in the hopes of reminding people how fast they're driving.
Page 71 still. Parks and Rec. Staff salaries is up 98%. Did they hire, is it a new hire? I'm just curious. Or is it a reallocation?
It's just reallocation.
Reallocation on page 72, under senior center, you see that there's a reduction there of 34,000.
Okay.
So it's just moving one line item to another.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol, how's in the car?
Are there any other questions about the budget?
Come on, I can't have asked them all.
Well, if anybody has any other questions, I'm certainly not going to cut off inquiry, but we'll move on at this point. in addition to the article on the budget, the amount of approximately $16.25 million, there are a series of smaller articles that relate to budgetary items. And I will explain Article 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. I think we'll start with 17. We are asking for authority to transfer $310,000 from the capital fund to the general fund to help fund this year's budget. What town meeting members will remember is that last year we asked for authority and we asked for money to fix the skating rink. And unfortunately, over the course of the months leading to and leading from town meeting, the target kept changing. So we actually came to informational meeting last year, and we got new information that day, if I recall, about what we thought it was going to cost to fix the skating rink. And then we got to town meeting, and I think it was the day before town meeting that we got new information about what we thought it was going to cost to fix the skating rink. And then I think we got new information one more time. And finally, the select board said, wait, enough change is enough change. This needs to be studied. Town meeting gave us authority last year to spend, I don't know, like $370,000 to fix the skating rink, $362 to fix the skating rink. And you trusted us last year to make the right decision about what was the way to fix the skating rink. We appointed a citizens committee. We asked that citizens committee to work with Carol and with an outside consultant to determine what was the best way to fix the skating rink. And I think the best way to explain what happened is that it was determined that there's this piece of equipment that was outside that really should have been inside and insulated. And so, what was it, Carol? What piece? Plate and frame. The plate and frame, compressor, condenser?
Heat exchanger.
The plate and frame heat exchange, when it was installed outside. And it was messing up the whole system. And so we authorized construction of an insulated addition to the skating rink equipment shed to put that plate and frame heat exchanger inside rather than outside. And then we also authorized an additional amount of money to do some additional work to the system. And to the tune of about $50,000, we believe that we have fixed the mechanical systems at the skating rink. And Carol, so far, how does it seem?
The rink closed on Sunday.
Because it was broken.
Because we had a successful season and 19 weeks were up.
Could you drop the mic, please? Could you drop the mic?
Yeah.
Just to give you a quick overview of where we were a year ago to where we are today, as David mentioned, we replaced the 160 horsepower compressor. And then we enclosed the building during the early winter months, December, January. That cost us just about $9,000, $8,945. Forever Green built that, and then we pumped in heat to keep that building heated to the level of about 40 to 45 degrees. We had a very successful season. We had a very cold winter, as you all know, and we didn't have the issues that we would have had if that plate and frame was outside. Because once those temperatures start to stay bitter cold for an extended period is when we started to have issues with the compressors. And then the last piece of it was, as David also mentioned, Vermont Commercial Refrigeration came down, did an evaluation of the system, so how we can preserve the $30,000 that we put in to replace the 60 and the 100 to get some longevity out of that. And then what we're going to be doing here, we just had shutdown on Sunday, so we're going to be putting in 2 oil separators and 2 valves, and we'll have a memorandum of understanding with Vermont Commercial Refrigeration, and I suspect we'll have a successful season next year like we did this year.
So we have $310,000 left over from the authority you gave us last year to fix the skating rink, and we want to turn that right back into the budget in order to lower the tax rate, and that's what we're going to do with that $310,000. So are there any other questions about that Article 17? Article 15 and 16 sort of go together in that they both represent the same request to take money from the unassigned fund balance to defray costs if necessary. On September 11th of 2013, we got 5 inches of rain in about 2 hours, and there was some significant flooding. It tore up the Elm Street Bridge, and it tore up some other locations around town, including a washout on Chestnut Street and a washout down by the railroad bridge going over to Hinsdale. And it cost $92,000 and change to rebuild the Elm Street Bridge. And we were able to fund that temporarily through our authority under what is now Article 9 to borrow money in anticipation taxes, grants, and other revenue from ourselves and fix the bridge. If there is a surplus at the end of this year, it would be our intention to pay that money for the $92,000 Elm Street Bridge repair out of the money that was raised by taxes in this current fiscal year. But if we don't have enough money, we want authority to take that from the surplus to the unassigned fund balance to pay for those repairs that were unanticipated. It's hard to say at this point whether we're going to have a surplus or not at the end of the year. Obviously, we're facing significant unexpected expenses that we're not budgeted for the winter road maintenance. And we get regular reports from the finance director about where we stand in the budget, but we can't really predict at this point where we're going to be at the end of the year. Is there any question about that Article 15 for $92,000 from the unassigned fund balance to pay for the Elm Street Bridge repairs? Cool. So that Article 16, we learned partway through the year that, well, cool, it's cool. We learned partway through the year that we were going to be charged like some huge amount of rent, I don't know, $1,000, $2,000 a month, to keep our communications towers up on top of Mount Wantasticus. And we tasked the interim town manager, working with the department heads, to see if we could find a better way so that we weren't paying rent to the vendor for the state of New Hampshire that owns that site. And Patrick and the department heads and people at the various departments, along with the vendor, just did a great job. We want to thank them for coming up with a new system where our police and fire communications equipment are now going to be housed at the Experiment, at the hospital, and at a tower up at Pleasant Valley Reservoir, and then at least for now on the ski jump tower. Although if we get a grant to give us new equipment for the repeaters for the police department, we won't have to put the equipment on top of the ski jump either. So it's going to cost us it has cost us, we've already authorized expenditure of $50,000 to move the communications equipment out of Hinsdale and into Brattleboro, onto our own property and onto the property of these community partners. We really want to thank the hospital, the Experiment, and the Ski Jump Outing Club for giving us the ability to put that equipment in those locations. It's only through their cooperation and hard work of these employees that gave us this new system. So we're asking for $57,000, again, if you don't have surplus at the end of the year, to pay for that work that was not budgeted for. Any questions about that one? Patrick?
It's not a question so much as I want to say it was a really, it was a pleasure to work particularly with the hospital and SIT and the folks at Harris Hill. And just one of the things I'd like everybody to understand is when we were looking around for partners to assist us in this effort, those folks really stepped up, and they're not even charging us rent. So the hospital, SIT, and Harris Hill really stepped up and did a good thing for the town.
Article 14 speaks to a fund that was established in the mid-'80s. I may have been a town meeting member there when I first moved here 30 years ago, when we set up the Agricultural Land Protection Fund. There was $50,000 in the Agricultural Land Protection Fund as of like the mid-'80s in order to provide essentially bridge funding, as I understand it, to help preserve farmland within the town of Brattleboro. And it was brought to my attention by somebody who gave me a call one day who said there's $95,000 in that fund and it hardly ever gets used. And we went back and we researched the history, and I think probably in the 30 years since that fund was established, or almost 30 years, maybe we've made 2 loans out of the fund, and there hasn't been any activity out of that fund in about 15 years. And Patrick could correct me if I'm wrong about the numbers.
I think that's right.
So 2 loans, and there has been no activity in the last 15 years. So initially, we talked about it. We asked the Ag Committee to come to the Select Board meeting and talk with us about it. And there was a division on that Ag Committee. Mr. Robb said we have much better loan availability nowadays, and we don't need that fund anymore. And then there was another farmer who said, I'm just starting out and we could use to have that money available. So there was some division, but the board decided at that point to put on the ballot or put on the town meeting whether you wanted to retask that $95,000, $50,000 principal and $45,000 built up interest to provide property tax relief, because there's significant property taxes we have to pay. Another topic was discussed intently November, December into January, which was the issue of energy efficiency and audits. And members of the Energy Committee came to the Select Board and made a request for like, I don't know, $4,700 to do energy audits. But further investigation indicated that $4,700 was really a totally unrealistic number if we were really going to do comprehensive energy audits of the town's buildings going forward. We already pay like $126,000 a year for the Honeywell work that was done to replace the boilers, and that's been refinanced thanks to Mr. O'Connor's work, but we're still paying off those boilers, and it's my understanding from the Energy Committee that we're now in the black from the Honeywell work, even though we got to pay like $126,000 a year. We're now getting more money back from what we invested than what we paid. But there's still more energy efficiency work to be done. The top of the town hall is not insulated, and so heat's just going out the roof of the town hall. We're going to be doing work at the police fire facilities, and that will be energy efficient because that's what those people do for a living. But there's a lot of energy efficiency investigation to be done. And so we're now making the proposal that we establish an energy efficiency fund in the amount of $50,000 from that agricultural loan fund, and that the remaining money, $45,000, be spent for tax relief. So that's what item 14 is about. Yeah. So if anybody's got questions, or anybody else, I'm sorry, only hearing me talk.
You did a good job.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Tell us your name, please.
Jackie Stromberg, District 2. What I'm hearing when we're building this new $14 million addition to the town hall, that insulation isn't going to be done in the old part of the town hall? I mean, this seems crazy to me.
What I can say is that the police fire project, what's the total of the building costs themselves? Construction. All right, the construction costs for the police fire facilities total about $11 million. The remainder of the $14 million bond is for all the associated costs that go with it. So it's about $11 million in construction costs. And the work that's going to be done is going to be an addition onto Town Hall for the police. It's going to be a new building replacing the West Brattleboro Fire Station, and then an addition to Central Fire Station. The scope of that work is the work within those 3 departments and some additional work to move planning from the 2nd floor to the 1st floor. Other insulation work within Town Hall and all the other town buildings, including Gibson-Aiken Center, the water distribution buildings and the like, that's not within the scope of the police fire work.
It just seems ridiculous to me to spend all that money at the town hall and not have it insulated properly.
Just in response to that, the energy efficiency fund that David just mentioned is that's going to be used to, hopefully if it passes that and some other funding, will be used to audit the buildings, and we'll be advised what should be done to the town hall and all the other town buildings, as many as we can afford, in terms of maximizing conservation. So it's hard to imagine that there wouldn't be a suggestion for a lot of insulation going in upstairs in the town hall, but it's not part of the police fire project. It's something that's going to happen, but it's not part of that funding.
Other questions about that one? And I hope that we'll hear from members of the ag community at town meeting. I don't know what everybody's going to vote on that, but we think that it's an appropriate way to focus on additional and changing priorities that we've got. Energy efficiency is an important thing, and we have significant tax burdens to address. And that segues right into Article 18. What I want to explain is that the anticipated tax increase this year over last year is like 7.8 cents or 8.5 cents? 8.5 cents on $100. And the reason for the 8.5 cent increase includes, in part, the increase in the overall budget and spending level, which is about 3.8%, including the police fire increase, the increase in the bond for this year. But it also is an increase because last year we spent $750,000 that we had built up in surplus to defray the tax increase or to offset the tax increase. And so really what you're seeing in this 8.5 cent increase this year is 2 years worth of increase that's hitting this year, because last year we paid it all out of the savings account. So this year we've got an 8.5 cent increase. We had about a penny last year, so it's 9.5 cents over 2 years, about 4.5 cents annual over this 2-year period. But last year we had cash in the bank, and we spent that because there was no reason to hold it back. The recommendations from all the experts is that we should keep about 10% of our annual budget as unreserved fund, as a surplus. John, that's fair to say?
Yes.
10%. And that's what we've got now, about 10%. What is, John, could you tell us what is, generally, what is the surplus that we're carrying from last year?
About $1.6 million.
All right, $1.6 million. Just 10% of the budget. But there are those of us, in fact, almost all of us, who think taxes are too high and the tax increase is too high. And so the next article is intended to address that issue, and I'm going to ask John to speak to it, because it was his idea.
Well, I knew you were going to ask me to do this, but that's okay. It's pretty self-explanatory. Our taxes are too high. And I really ran for the select board thanks Tim, to lower taxes or to at least stabilize them. Like David said, last year we found $765,000 that wasn't going to be used or as a surplus. I think it's our obligation to try to lower taxes as much as we can. The unassigned reserve fund is built up on the backs of taxes. So again, John, am I correct on that?
Yes.
Okay. So, the 10% that we want to keep in that fund is just a guideline. There are some towns across the country or even in Vermont that don't have anything in reserve. We're lucky enough to have that. So to use $200,000 of that, and is it about 100,000 per percent?
Yes.
So, you know, that'll help decrease it by a couple percent. And that's, you know, that's what I'd like to use that money for. So if there's any questions on that, address them to David.
Before we take questions from the floor, I'm just going to give a counterpoint for what that's worth. I'm opposed to spending the money from the surplus for this purpose this year. The bond payments on police fire, this coming year are about $740,000. The biggest years for the bond are 2016 through 2027, about 10 years there. Next year, we have about $1,240,000 in interest and principal payments on the bond. And to me, it seems that if we're going to be looking for tax relief going forward, it's prudent to consider that in years future, but not this particular year. This also goes to the 1% issue that we put on the town meeting again, and we'll speak to that next. But for right now, that's at least some opposition to the spending money out of the surplus to bring down the tax rate. John, so you're in it.
John Lomerty, District 2, member of the Representative Town Meeting Finance Committee. The Finance Committee, as it is now constituted, has been in place for about 3 years. And we looked extensively at this issue of how much funds should be held in reserve. And we came up with a recommendation that a policy be established that 10%, I think it is, be held in reserve each year. And my understanding, this came in extremely handy after Hurricane Irene. And that was one of the reasons why we did not have some additional costs or obligations that we might have otherwise incurred. But the Select Board came back to the Finance Committee and said, well, we will not regard this as a policy, but rather as a guideline. And this was a difference of opinion between the Finance Committee and the Select Board, which I don't think was ever quite resolved. I personally think that the Select Board was wise in recognizing that perhaps they can't establish that policy, that perhaps that establishing binding policies rests better in the hands of representative town meeting. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Ms. Webster.
John Webster, District 3. Question primarily, not an opinion. I appreciate what you said, David, about what's coming down the road, the increasing payments, and that having that extra reserve rate might be useful to have. My own question is, what in the past have we normally run as a surplus? Hasn't, my memory tells me, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 have been often been the surplus in place. Is that true or not? Am I wrong?
I think that 8 years ago, we didn't have any surplus. And so we built up the surplus over the years. Last year, we had 10% plus $750,000, and we turned that $750,000 back into the tax rate. So I can't tell you, we can get you the numbers of what the surplus has been annually, but I can't give you a chapter and verse.
Well, that's why I guess my question is 10% just seems like a very high figure. I don't know what's happening among the larger communities in the state. It strikes me well above what we've had in the past. And I can see perhaps the reason for saving a little of that. But in this case, it just strikes me as a little high. And I don't have a strong opinion one or the other, because I in the past have supported keeping the surplus as high as it was. There was efforts in many cases to reduce it to almost nothing. And I oppose that. So I understand the surplus concept, and I understand what might be coming. But 10% just strikes me as a figure that is approved by accountants who support municipal government associations and like consulting thing rather than feet on the ground in a situation we're facing today with taxes.
At the risk of putting John in a bad situation with that introduction. I'll ask John, please, to speak to that issue about why we want to keep 10%.
10% is not really considered a high level, particularly by the bond rating agencies. We're not rated by the agencies as a single town, but those towns that are rated by bonding agencies generally have anywhere from 20% up. So the 10% is not a large number for a town to target. And most people that I've spoken with, including the bond bank and other parties, have said that 10% is a reasonable figure to shoot for.
And interim town manager reminds me that we spent about $2 million in upfront costs before we got reimbursed by FEMA and both state and federal for the Irene work. And without that money in the bank, we would have been in the situation much closer to some of our surrounding towns, which still don't have all their bridges, or maybe just finally got their bridges back in place, just to our southwest, without naming names. Mr. Phillips.
Steve Phillips, District 3. So we have a warrant article, number 18, that says $200,000 is the figure. To what extent do we have flexibility if the town reps say 300,000 is a better number?
I think we have full flexibility. The town attorney can also weigh in on that, but I think we could apply money from the surplus without there even being an article on the warning. It's just that John wanted a team on shore.
I wanted 300,000.
Thank you.
Other questions? I saw a hand. Spoon. Yeah, Bob will speak for them.
That is, it is correct that that can be amended by motion to amend at town meeting if voted upon. Thank you.
Spoon Agave, District 3. What we haven't heard, but it may be obvious, when the experts say that 10% is a reasonable number, why do the experts say that? And I'm going to assume, because I didn't do any of the research myself, but I'm going to assume that they used that figure because they looked around and studied all the municipalities or the relevant entities and found that typically something will go wrong in a municipality over a certain amount of time that will in fact require about that much money. Of course, maybe more, a lot more, maybe less. But that was, that amount of 10% is the kind of insurance, you might say, that is typically actually needed. What the risk is that if we don't have reserves and we have an expense, then we have to take money out of the bank, and on top of every other expense in a disaster, we have insurance, we have interest to pay. So that's the gamble. I mean, we all say that it may well be that nobody in this room has had an auto accident in years. And many people in this room may never have a car accident. So you probably don't need insurance. Well, I mean, you pays you money, you takes your chances. The other thing is that I fear is that the reserves are going to dwindle further next year because there is not likely to be a surplus this year. And because we're using 200,000 in reserves this year, well, it's actually about 300, that money will not be available for next year's budget, so we will have to either raise the taxes that much more, because we're just deferring the taxes. We're not escaping them. We're just taking the taxes, the money that we need to operate this year, out of next year's expenses, and we'll have to make it up. And I'm afraid that next year, again, there'll be another request to take 200, 300, 400,000 more out. And it's this whole, I don't know, it's just hard to say. It's a gamble. It's recommended not to do it. And if we do it, then we have only ourselves to hold responsible. We recommend, the Finance Committee recommends that we do not use it.
Thanks. Other questions about that article? Ms. Kane?
Mary Kane, District 1. If you look around the room right here, just look. We have an aging population. And the economics in this town, we are spending too much, period. It disturbs me as an individual who is long away from retirement age that my children who are in their 20s cannot afford to buy a house. They can't afford to because we don't have the jobs. And as I look around the room, and as I look in this district that I am now in, with an aging population who has a set income, what is happening, I have had 6 people I know, some of whom have sat in those very seats, who have left this community. Left, never to return. I am concerned that we have not yet given the opportunity for the individuals in this town to speak to the issue that we are spending too much. They are not spending too much. The people that we represent in this room, right here, the farmers, the hard workers, the individuals who can barely afford it to live here, we are not doing them a service by doing this. We can, in fact, do that. We do it. Last year, in 13 hours worth of meetings, we said we did not want to spend more. And yet you stand before us, seated, and say, we're going to spend more. I don't like that. I'm going to stand up and say, I don't like that. And that disturbs me a great deal, that we're continually doing what the people we represent do not want us to do. And I am asking you to change on town meeting day and decide that the people that you actually represent, you are going to be accountable for, because you're not being accountable for them as we hear you speak today.
I would just like to point out that this body last year approved a $14.1 million budget or expenditure on the police fire station. So I take a little bit of offense when, you know, the negative comes up to the select board when we're just, you know, we're listening to what's going on out there. And so that it disturbs me a little bit when you know, when it falls onto our shoulders. We try to do the best we can with the budget that we have, but it's inevitable. It's up to that body right there that dictates how much we spend. So,
if I might, I spoke last year about some of the structural issues that result in the tax rate in Brattleboro being so high. And the board has taken a pretty comprehensive approach trying to make sure that our expenses are properly tagged to the services that we provide and that we need to provide. And we review each department, like I said, over the course of the year. And it is our intention over the coming year to continue forward with that process, to review staffing levels, and to look at all different ways that we can try either cut costs or raise additional revenue. But we are functioning here at this town government level in the 21st century with a taxing structure and a revenue sharing structure that is not responsive to the way in which commercial activity now occurs. We have 12,000 people live in town, but there's way, way more people who come in here from all the surrounding towns to work and to shop and to go to school and to get their medical care. And we in Brattleboro are supporting that commercial activity by paying higher taxes than all those surrounding towns. And it's not a phenomenon that's just limited to Brattleboro. 7 of the top 11 tax rates for municipalities around the state are for regional economic hubs. Barry City, Springfield, Rutland City, Windsor, Brattleboro, Newport City, and Winooski have all tax rates running from $1 to $1.70 for their municipalities, and their surrounding towns pay way less in taxes. The average tax rate for the towns that surround Brattleboro is 51 cents at the municipal level. And that's because they don't need a full-time fire department, they don't need a full-time police department, they don't have all those miles of tar and sidewalk to maintain. And that's because we're paying to support the economic activity that allows people from surrounding towns to come in here and work and shop and get medical care. Now, we've made an effort to begin reaching out to try to deal with this issue on a statewide level. We've spoken with the legislators. Legislation has been introduced in the House to try to study the issue relating to the disparate impact, tax impact on regional economic hubs. It looks like that legislation isn't going anywhere. But we're going to continue trying to lobby for that legislation. We're going to be meeting with the governor in an effort to try to get some additional focus on this issue. I totally agree with Ms. Kane that the tax rate is way too high. And we're going to continue working to try to respond to that and keep tax rates down. People approach me all the time and say the tax rate's too high. My tax rate is too high. It absolutely is. But other than cutting firefighters so that we don't have fire response, or cutting police officers so that there's nobody who's going to respond when there's an emergency, it's been very difficult to find the places to cut out of this budget. We are exercising due diligence in an effort to provide the most cost-effective services possible. And the best I can tell you at this point is we're working on it. But the tax rate is way too high. There's no question about it. I absolutely agree. Yes, ma'am.
Deb Zach, District 2. I'd like to thank the Department of Public Works because my drive out from Living Memorial Park was a lot easier than what it was 2 weeks ago. And I just hope that the patches that you guys did really hold through this weather. So thank you. On a more serious note, I know that issue is serious to a lot of people though, so I'd like to understand what the impact of not using the $200,000 would be on the tax rate. And maybe John, can you speak to how much of that 8.5 cents, or would it increase by a certain amount of money, or?
The budget does not include the $200,000 at this point. So when you look at the budget, you're looking at a budget, an increase of 8.5 cents if we don't implement the 1% local option tax. If we were to authorize, the town representatives were to authorize the use of the $200,000, the tax rate would come down from the 8.5 cents to approximately 6.5 or 6.8, somewhere in that range. So it would come down between 1 and 2 cents.
Okay, so if we did implement the 1% on top of that, then are we going below 3.5 cents?
It depends on when the 1% gets implemented. If it's implemented July 1st for the whole year, then it could have a significant impact. It would be another reduction of approximately $650,000. So another 6 cents, if you will, in the tax rate. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's probably a good time to switch to the issue of the 1% sales tax. There are only 4 taxing mechanisms that the state authorizes: real estate taxes, rooms and meals, alcohol, and local option sales tax. And we had a lengthy discussion last year, and at the risk of extending town meeting for an hour or two, we thought it prudent to put this issue before town meeting members again, particularly because after the binding articles were adopted at last year's town meeting, there was a request to the select board to consider there was a request to the select board to try to work to keep the tax rate down. The mechanism that has been adopted or that's been followed to just bring this issue up again, we put this issue on the March 4th ballot, and it was a non-binding vote. And you saw the results of the vote. The people who cared enough to come out and vote, it was about, what, 50.5% to 49.5% in favor of the local option sales tax, which is totally different from what town meeting voted last year, which was like 19 in favor and like 100 against. And so what I've said before, what I've said again, is if you don't adopt the local option sales tax, the tax increases are going to go on your property tax bills. And so it's on for discussion again at town meeting. And so it's on the ballot, and I don't know if there's a lot of discussion that needs to be had now by way of questions, but it's certainly a topic that's also on for voting a week from Saturday. Is it Mr. Reuter? Yeah. You're a long way away, though. Sit in the front.
Bob Reuter, District 3. There's often a lot of emotional response when people talk about raising the sales tax, and yet I'm not exactly clear about what's covered and what's not covered. People talk about, well, you know, it's going to hit the poorest the hardest, but in fact maybe food and clothing aren't covered. Could someone outline specifically what gets taxed and what doesn't under the local option?
The local option sales tax excludes food, clothing, shoes, residential fuel and electricity, motor vehicles, medical items, manufacturing machinery and equipment, agricultural supplies, machinery and equipment, items for resale, products used in manufacturing goods for sale, newspapers, packing and shipping materials, electricity and fuel for farming, and electricity and fuel for manufacturing goods. And we have a list of those exemptions. In fact, it looks to me like there's more than one copy if anybody wants a copy.
What's left to tax?
Go build a house.
There's 4 copies left here if anybody wants to know what's on the list of exemptions. And it's on the town website as well. So the exemptions and other information about the 1% local option sales tax are on the town website as well. Yes, ma'am, I didn't get your name the last time, but Ms. Stromberg.
Under Article 21, you have that the imposed tax would be on tangible personal property, amusement charges. What are amusement charges?
This is amusement. I'm sorry, but this is free. I'm sorry. Article 21. No, Article 21 says to see if the town will assess a 1% local option sales tax in accordance with 24 VSA Section 138.
Right, but the description.
Oh, the description. So, all right. So you're looking at page 13.
Correct.
Second paragraph.
Tickets to shows. Entertainment.
Okay, how about fabrication charges?
It's the next word in the paragraph.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
could I respond to that?
Yes, please, Mr. Whitlock, if you can.
Marshall Wheelock from District 2. The final 24, 5 years of my working career was spent as a tax field examination supervisor for the state of Vermont. I will tell you that fabrication is the most difficult thing to define. The best way to do it would be to check Title 32 of Vermont statutes annotated, and then when that fails, try to state the Vermont Tax Department website. I'm not trying to kill the debate, but it's a type of manufacturing.
So my answer is, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question any better.
We're going to tax those people.
Patrick, we will try to answer that question and have that answer for town meeting on Saturday. And any other particular questions you have about that local option sales tax, please make sure to forward them to the interim town manager.
And the next item, some public utility charges. What are those?
We'll have more specificity to that. Thanks for those questions. Yeah. Mr. Davis.
Andrew Davis, District 3. Page 13, and it gives a lot of information about Article 21. And I've seen this number before, $650,000 to be raised. I mean, per year. I mean, that's 3 times the amount that Mr. Allen wants to take out of the surplus. That's a lot of money, $650,000. Has anyone tried to figure out approximately whose pockets that's coming out of? It's sort of related to the previous question. I mean, it's great to say $650,000 is going to rain down on the town every year with this 1%. But as I've talked to local business people, there was a good analysis in the paper about the sales tax doesn't stop someone from buying a new tube for their bicycle, but it may stop someone from buying a $1,200 bicycle in town. And I just wonder, you know, the reason it didn't pass last time we talked about it was we're a border town. They're not worried about these taxes in Burlington, Montpelier. They've got no competition on sales tax. And I just would love to see by town meeting someone talk about whose pockets that $650,000 is coming out of. Because if a chunk of it is coming out of our pockets, we're shooting we're just making it harder for our local business people, and we're still paying the bill. I mean, I know the fire police project is expensive, and I voted for it partly. I live in a pretty modest Brattleboro home that costs me probably as much in maintenance as it does in everything else. And I figured it was going to cost me $4 a week, my share in taxes, to upgrade our safety infrastructure in this town. And I thought, well, what can I forego for $4 a week? Our taxes, our property taxes also have income sensitivity. So I guess that's my little editorial, but my informational, which is what tonight is about, is has somebody done an analysis of whose pockets are we just trying to get people driving up and down 91 to leave $650,000 in our mailboxes on their way through town, or is it really coming out of our pockets too? I try to do a lot of shopping locally. I do most of my shopping locally. So I guess I'm going to be paying a lot of that $650,000. I'd love to see that answered by town meeting. Thank you.
We'll do our best to provide that data. I'm not sure it's particularly quantifiable.
Yep.
Ms. Phillips?
So, Steve Phillips again, District 3. My recollection is that we did not vote on this issue last year. If we did, it does not appear to be in the minutes.
The October meeting.
The October meeting, okay. And my recollection also is that it was more resoundingly defeated. Do we have minutes for that meeting?
The numbers are not recorded. It just says resoundingly defeated.
Yeah. When I counted at that meeting, there were 4 people standing in favor of the adoption. So that's just my count. Unofficial. So I'm not in favor of adoption of this tax. I think it is regressive. I think it is it's going to hurt those least able to pay. I also question not just the wisdom of adopting the tax, and I'll speak more about the lack of wisdom at town meeting, but I question the appropriateness. So the statute that allows us to do this says local option taxes are authorized for the purpose of affording municipalities an alternative method of raising municipal revenues, and this is the important part, to facilitate the transition and reduce the dislocations in those municipalities that may be caused by the reforms to the method of financing public education under the Equal Education Opportunity Act of 1997. So I'd just like to ask the Select Board, to what extent is that the purpose of the adoption of this tax? It seems to me it's to pay for the police and fire station, not for the purpose that the legislature authorized. So maybe you thought about that question. If you have, I'd like to know what you think.
I don't know that any of us have considered that question. We will ask the town attorney to research that issue as to whether the raising of local option sales tax is limited by the language that you're speaking of, and have that answer for Saturday. Ms. Miller?
Nancy Miller, District 1. I feel that we have a very good tourist base here in Brattleboro. And I'm not going to get into the issue that Steve raised, but I think we have a lot of tourists. And I don't think when you're a tourist that you think about, oh, there's a 1% option tax in this town. I'm not going to buy that item that I saw that I really liked at Vermont Artisans or that at one of the stores downtown. I also know that a lot of people here in town are very loyal to the stores downtown. And even though we can go across the river very easily, we still shop downtown. And I'd like, the other reps to consider that. Thank you.
Raphael Saltman, District 2. I wasn't here last year when I guess people decided that we should build a new fire police station. And I was just wondering if it's really a good idea and if we can afford to actually build it. It seems like it's incredibly expensive. It's the equivalent of 1 year's county budget. And we're having trouble paying for it. Is it too late to reconsider that question? Or is the police station going to save us money down the road?
The short answer I can provide is that there was a lengthy public process that led to the decision to do renovations to police fire facilities. And there were significant public safety reasons for that decision, including decades and decades of delayed investment in our public infrastructure and facilities. At last year's town meeting, a motion was made to cut the budget by the amount of the bond payment, and I think it would be appropriate this year, just like last, if somebody were to make a motion to try to stop that project dead in its tracks by cutting $700,000 or $800,000 out of the budget. It's certainly a topic for discussion. I'm not recommending that that's the way we proceed, but and I'm not sure that it's a topic for discussion here right now. But you're approving the budget a week from Saturday, and the select board has proposed a budget covering the reasonably anticipated expenses over the course of the next year. And if you as town meeting determine that you don't like that budget, you can vote it down. You saw what happened in Vernon. They don't have a police department anymore, and they don't have a school budget. And you know, our town meeting is next Saturday, and we'll see what happens at town meeting next Saturday. Sir, I know you were elected today, but
I thought I was in the blinds.
I saw your hand. I just don't know your name.
I know, sure. My name is Richard Langler, District 2. And something that puzzles me is I don't see how a sales tax is a regressive tax. I wonder if that's just some kind of a buzzword. Because to me, I buy everything in town, and I buy things sometimes that I really can't afford, and I consider those discretionary, discretionary expenditures. I think with all the exemptions that we just heard a list of, I think that the only time that we have to worry about a 1% tax is if we want to buy something that we don't need, or that we just want and maybe we can use it. I don't think that's regressive. I think that's totally discretionary. So that's, of course, I'm in favor of Article 21.
We're going to have a full opportunity to discuss this next Saturday. So, Mr. Agave.
Mr. Agave. If I'm not mistaken, that tax is collected by the state, and then they keep a 30% administration cost, and then we get the rest. So in fact, we need to spend enough money to collect about $900,000, almost $1 million in sales taxes to get back $650,000. So when you begin to look at it like that, it's not there is some money that is spent by out-of-towners. Most of the tourists are just in the restaurants and entertainment and cultural stuff. They're not paying the taxes. So, but there are people who live in some neighboring towns that spend money in town. So some of that is collected from non-residents. But I don't think a whole lot. I would imagine most of it is paid by people who live in town, ourselves. And it's also has to be remembered, it's not like we are in any way reducing the cost of the police and fire project. We're just paying for it in nickels and dimes. It would almost be as if we said, let's just eliminate the property tax altogether and charge everybody $5 a day for living here. Or something, $8 a day. And say, well, geez, $8 a day, that's not very expensive. That's not much. Or $10 a day, whatever. Well, it has to be $20 a day. But the point is that we're not saving ourselves any money. We're just taking it from the property tax, which is a more progressive tax, and we explain that in the financial statement. What that means to those people who don't understand it, a progressive tax is paid according to ability to pay. A regressive tax, everybody pays the same, whether they have the ability or not. As if to say, everybody in town pays $4,000 a year taxes, or $8,000, and it's the same for everybody, regardless of their incomes, as opposed to having the income sensitivity program, which puts more of the burden on the people who can afford it. Therefore, it's a more equitable tax. So what we're doing is transferring some of the burden from those people who are more able to afford it to those people who are less able to afford it. Even though they may be exempt from some of the basic items, but everybody still has to buy a computer, and so it still remains, whether there are exemptions or not, it still remains a regressive tax.
Are there further questions about any of the articles that are on this act next? Any other questions about anything else? Ms. Stark?
Just one quick question on the...
I want to use the mic or...
Just one quick question going back to the Public Works, when we moved part of Steve's salary from the utilities budget to the regular budget. And I'm just wondering why we did that. I mean, the utilities budget is paid for, it's an enterprise fund, it's paid for by the people that use it, right? So why did we move it to the back of everybody else?
I think the answer is that on re-examination of the budget this year, the way Steve's time was allocated didn't make sense before. And so now I think we've got his time allocated 50-50 over utilities and public works, which is more representative of how his time is spent. Steve's nodding his head, so I think I got that right. Mr. Wilmer?
My question pertains to Western Avenue and the difficulties that we've had in keeping the pavement together this year. I think it's the worst I've ever seen it. And my rudimentary knowledge of how highways are built tells me this is happening partly because there's no camber on that road. Instead of having a peak in the center and places where water can drain off to and be drained away from the road, all the water pools on the road. It's just flat. The thing needs to be rebuilt, not repaved, and that's the state's job.
Okay. Mr. Knowles?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. Bill Knowles from District 1. I was curious because the state has I think it's a timeline, 2020 to rebuild Western Avenue. That's from scratch. Build us a new road. The question I want answers. Well, I'm just throwing this out. You can tell me I'm wrong and prove I'm wrong. But I want to know, is the taxpayers, Brattleboro taxpayers, going to continue to pay for the repair of that lousy road going all the way out to the mountain there and all the way downtown? Because it is horrible. And when I heard that the contract was 2020, that the state was going to do that, I was wondering who's going to take care of it up until 2020. Are the taxpayers going to waste money, keep on repairing this road every winter? Or is the state going to come in and do it the right way?
My current understanding is that the state is not planning to do a total rebuild of the road in 2020. It's just next on the state's agenda to repave in that time frame, and that if we're going to see the road better between now and then, we're going to have to spend the money, unless we get some money from the state some other way. And I don't think that totally rebuilding the subsurface of that road is currently on the state's agenda. Not from what I've heard. Steve?
No.
No, it's not.
I can't get it straight because it's been on my mind for a couple of months now. Is there a way of communicating with the state?
We're communicating with the state.
Thank you.
In every manner possible. I can't quite have an answer, but we're working on it.
No, I see it.
Ms. Barber? I think we'll take a couple more comments or questions, and then we'll wrap this up. Hopefully it's not icy out.
Ryan Dorfer, District 1. When we do communicate with the state, or as an ongoing thing, I hope we will forcefully remind them that down at the bottom of that highway is the old concrete two-lane highway. And until that concrete is out of there and a whole lot of crushed rock, more than we have any money for, is in there, it will never drain. And of course, the whole camber idea is the correct idea. Thank you.
Ms. Montgomery?
I would just like to thank the skating rink committee for saving us $270,000 this past year. Anybody who's on that
Mr. Scholes.
Before we go, I want to remind you all that the school district will be having its public meeting next Wednesday in this same building. I believe it starts at 5:30, and because the food service is in this building, there'll be refreshments. So I hope you all come.
I want to thank you for coming out tonight. Everybody drive safe. Thank you